When you think of racism, what do you think of? I believe most of you would think of the African American community or the Hispanic Latino community. That's not what I'm here to talk to you about. So currently in the news, the Asian community has been getting a lot of publicity due to recent hate crimes and genocide. Why? Why is the only reason we think about these racial issues if a tragedy in our lives affects us? If my theory proves right, then the only way to create anti-racism movements is from tragedy. Now that may seem a little bit far-fetched, but after extensive research, I believe that to be true. Then following, all the races would have to be subjected to some life-changing event to bring the racism that they experience every day to the table for discussion. Currently in the news, there has been a lot of incidents revolving around the minority communities, and they were ruled out as hate crimes. As an Asian woman currently living in America, I have not experienced physical acts of racism, but more or less verbal acts of racism. Me and my friends never really had any conversations about the racism that we experience in our everyday lives. But recently, one of my friends came out and she talked to all of us and gave us a story about how she was called multiple racial slurs by a hockey teammate. She repeatedly told him to stop, and obviously he didn't, and everyone on her hockey team did not stand up for her. And he started to refer to her as the coolest chink he knew, or Sienna Chink. These are multiple times that my culture is being made fun of, or that others are verbally belittling the community. President Biden has also helped to combat racism in our society by implementing a couple of laws, and he made a couple of executive orders to stop racism in our society. And that makes me think and ponder my question from earlier. Why do we only address these problems when something happens or when a tragedy occurs that is referring to the problem? For example, the Holocaust began in 1941, and the US had wind of it in around 1942, when it took the Jewish community only, might I add, to speak to our government and say, there's a problem, and we are afraid for our lives. So stereotypes are also ways that can come about and cause drama, if you must, in our community. And myself, I have been stereotyped to in fact be a dog eater or a rice picker. And these are a couple of times that the community has been asking for help because these are things that we really can't deal with from a mental health perspective. And in our society, we are categorized and put into these social boxes by appearance, personality, etc. So a couple of the questions that I was asked as a child was like, hey, do you know karate? Or are you good at math? Can you help me? Do you eat Chinese food every night? And most of my answers was no, because these are stereotypes that revolve around my ethnicity, but they're just not true. If I'm being totally honest, racism has affected me in my 13 years of life, and in instances, sometimes when I'm out with my mother, who is white, I get stared at occasionally because you see an Asian woman walking around with a white mother, and some people just don't deem that acceptable, which is kind of crazy to think about. But if I had something to say to them, I would ask why. Why do you deem me and my family to not be acceptable? This is a form of stereotyping, and the list goes on for racial-themed stereotypes. Everyone would, or not everyone would assume, but those people would regularly think, hey, white people have to have white kids, or Asian people have to have Asian kids. The list goes on. But this whole problem revolves around needing the whole community's help to stop all of these issues. We, as a country, and just in general, all of us need to help combat all of these issues that go around in our world so it can be better. And the adults and children of our community are our future. They're also our present, but if their parents are killed off just for being them and expressing their culture, then what does that show to the rest of the world? How they perceive us. And I don't think that we want to have a bad name for our country in general. How will the children grow up in our society? With no adult guidance, they will never know the difference between right and wrong. And we need to be setting the example for all the rest of the world. We should be the change makers of our world. But if we don't, then, and everything goes on, then the world will still be full of tragedy and death. And I think all of us can agree that we want the same thing, which is equality and peace. Thank you.